In the summer of 1972, a filmmaker from Queens took a hairdresser's budget and a 6-day shooting schedule and turned it into a cultural earthquake that would shake America to its core. The result was a movie that made over $50 million, reached the Supreme Court, and is still debated over 50 years later. A film released in the heart of Nixon's America that fused controversy with mainstream curiosity and became one of the most defining artifacts of an era that would never come again. Gerard Damiano, a former hairdresser turned filmmaker, was focused on proving that mature entertainment could be more than grainy loops shown in dingy theaters. Not only that, unlike the disposable content that had dominated the industry until then, Damiano wanted to do something bigger, a film that felt like an actual movie. Real lighting, actual editing, and most importantly, a plot. He had seen the underground success of similar experimental works, and he wanted to create something that could cross over. First, though, he needed his star. Linda Borman was a 22-year-old woman from the Bronx when producer Lou Perrino cast her for the leading role. She performed under the stage name Linda Lovelace and had only recently entered the industry. According to later accounts, she was living under the control of her manager and husband, Chuck Trainer. The casting happened quickly, the script was loose, and nobody involved had any idea what they were about to create. Linda, for her part, negotiated minimal pay, just $1,250 total. For comparison, that's the cost of a used car in 1972. Given that the film would go on to gross tens of millions of dollars, Linda's compensation became one of the great injustices in entertainment history. However, the exploitation went far deeper than money, but more on that later. Shot in just 6 days in Miami, Florida, on a shoestring budget of $22,000, the film was narratively ambitious and weirdly structured. The premise was absurd, almost comedic. A woman seeks satisfaction and discovers her key to pleasure is located in an anatomically impossible location. The entire story hinged on this surrealist concept. Damiano filmed it with moody lighting and actual cinematography. In a bold creative choice, he gave the film an actual 3-act structure with character development. The whole thing felt artistically closer to a midnight movie rather than the typical industry output from the era. To differentiate even further from standard fare, Damiano insisted on humor and plot progression. This was a movie that didn't apologize for what it was, but it also didn't insult its audience's intelligence. Harry Reams was cast as the Doctor, a struggling stage actor who earned just $250 for his work. Other cast members were cobbled together from New York's underground theater scene and the emerging adult film community. The production wrapped after those 6 days in January 1972, and Damiano moved into post-production with no expectations beyond maybe breaking even. And then we have the release of the film. The stars really aligned for Damiano and the producers in this regard. Deep Throat premiered at the New Mature World Theater in Times Square on June 12, 1972. Initial buzz was modest, but word of mouth began spreading like wildfire. Not about shock value, but about the film's humor, its production quality, and most fascinatingly, its plot. Then something unprecedented happened. Mainstream celebrities began publicly attending screenings. Johnny Carson cracked jokes about it on The Tonight Show. Truman Capote was spotted at screenings. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein immortalized the title by using it as the codename for their Watergate informant. You couldn't script better marketing. The film that started in a Times Square theater was now embedded in American political history. By late 1972, Deep Throat had crossed over from adult theaters to art house cinemas. Couples attended together. Film critics reviewed it in the New York Times. Cultural commentators debated whether this represented a new era of sexual liberation or moral decay. The film was grossing $30,000 per week from single theaters. Extraordinary numbers for any independent film. Box office estimates vary wildly, but conservative figures suggest at least $50 million in theatrical revenue. Some estimates climb as high as $600 million when accounting for decades of re-releases and international distribution. For a film shot for the price of a modest house, these numbers were absolutely staggering. But mainstream success brought mainstream scrutiny. The film became the target of obscenity prosecutions across America. Theater managers were arrested from coast to coast. The film was banned in 23 states. Most shockingly, actor Harry Reams was convicted of conspiracy to distribute obscenity. making him potentially the first performer in American history to face federal charges simply for acting in a film. His conviction was eventually overturned, but the precedent sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. Meanwhile, darker connections were emerging. The Perrino family, who financed and distributed the film, had alleged ties to organized crime. The FBI launched investigations. Suddenly, Deep Throat wasn't just controversial cinema, it was evidence in federal racketeering cases. While the film generated millions and sparked national debates about art and censorship, the reality behind the camera was far darker than audiences realized. In 1980, 8 years after the premiere, Linda Lovelace published her autobiography titled Ordeal. Her revelations shocked even those familiar with exploitation in entertainment. She claimed that every moment of her performance was conducted under coercion, threats, and physical violence from Chuck Traynor. She stated she was essentially held prisoner and forced into the production against her will. Linda revealed she never saw meaningful compensation, while the film generated a fortune for everyone else involved. She spent the remainder of her life speaking out against the industry and advocating for victims of domestic violence and exploitation. Her testimony raised profound and uncomfortable questions. Questions about consent, about the line between performance and coercion, and about who profits when entertainment becomes controversial. Whether you view the adult film industry as capable of ethical production or inherently exploitative, Linda's story became impossible to ignore. It ensured that Deep Throat could never be remembered as simply a quirky cultural artifact. She attempted mainstream acting, became an and tried to build a life separate from her past. But the shadow of Deep Throat followed her until her death in a car accident in 2002 at age 53. Gerard Damiano continued making films but never achieved the same cultural penetration. He maintained until his death in 2008 that Deep Throat represented artistic freedom. So what is Deep Throat's legacy over 50 years later? First, it proved that genre films could achieve mainstream success when given actual production values, narrative structure, and creative ambition. Before Deep Throat, the industry operated entirely in the shadows with no pretense of artistry. After Deep Throat, productions attempted to replicate its crossover appeal with varying degrees of success. Second, it sparked a national conversation about censorship and the First Amendment that influenced American law for decades. The obscenity trials reached the highest courts and shaped how we define protected speech. Third, the financial success proved there was a massive market for adult entertainment, leading directly to the home video revolution and eventually internet distribution. Deep Throat essentially proved the business model that would dominate for the next 50 years. The film has been the subject of multiple documentaries, referenced in hundreds of mainstream films and television shows, and taught in film studies courses worldwide. It's been analyzed by sociologists, cultural historians, and legal scholars. But perhaps most importantly, it revealed the uncomfortable truth that massive commercial success and profound human exploitation can exist in the same story. Linda Lovelace's revelations ensure that Deep Throat remains a complicated, troubling artifact rather than a simple curiosity from a bygone era. The making of Deep Throat represents a unique collision in American cultural history, when a $22,000 film could become one of the highest-grossing independent productions of all time. When celebrities and FBI agents were equally interested in the same movie, and when America was forced to confront its conflicted relationship with sexuality, censorship, and freedom itself. If you found this deep dive into cinema history fascinating, this channel explores the untold stories behind the most controversial and culturally significant films from the Golden Age. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next investigation into the films that changed everything. What do you think Deep Throat's true legacy is? A cultural milestone, a cautionary tale, or something far more complicated? Leave your thoughts below. I'm your host from Universal Desires, reminding you that the most famous stories in cinema are never as simple as they appear. Thanks for watching.